I'd also like to thank Laura Jones for giving her warm words to all those local government officers and local government in general across Wales for all they do in providing public services across our country. Laura Jones raised issues with the Welsh Government passing laws in this Senedd and regulation without passing on money to local authorities to support them. I was in Health Committee this morning talking about even more regulations that the Welsh Government hope to pass, which will put more pressure on local government. But yet again, we're not seeing the money following those regulations. So it's yet again this Welsh Government making law, but actually no money put it with it to enforce it. The funding floor was raised by a number of members here, and it's something I think is a positive that we do have a funding floor now for local government. It's something that has been asked for, but it could have gone further. And I'm sure members on the opposite bench will say, well, how are you going to fund that? But that's what's done through budget reprioritisation, isn't it? What we would do on these benches is reprioritise some of those Welsh Government budgets, relook at budget lines to make sure that happens, because I don't deal in fantasy economics. I actually believe in putting forward credible plans, unlike some other parties in this place. Reserves were also raised by Laura Jones, Janet Finch-Saunders and Joel James about the number of local authorities across Wales holding huge amounts of reserves. But I always say what other members say, not all reserves are there and can be earmarked and used. Some of them are used, as the Minister did say, for the housing revenue account for social services. But there are elements of usable reserves within local authorities. Joyce Watson, I think, needs to take a lesson in how local authority reserves are actually allocated, because she said it's all for capital. And I can assure you, as someone who was in local government for a while, they're not all capital reserves. So maybe you could have a lesson with the Welsh Government of how their reserves are actually spent. The national insurance rise was raised by a lot of people in this chamber. Janet Finch-Saunders raised it, and also Helen Thecken raised it as well. And I think it's a very important point which members raise, which I think has been totally missed by the Labour government in Westminster, about the sheer pressure that this is going to put on local government. The Minister talked about the additional money that is going into local government. All of that now is going to have to go on pay and pressures, because if we do not fund our social services departments properly, and we do not fund our children's services departments properly, those departments run on staff, and national insurance rises there are really going to hurt. So all that additional money, Minister, will not be actually spent improving services. It will be actually made and spent on keeping staff in the job. Council tax was a huge part of this debate. It was raised by Joel James, Laura Jones, Gareth Davis and Janet Finch-Saunders. All talked very passionately about council tax raises in their own authorities, like mine in Powys County Council. And I do think we need to have local residents having a say on council tax rises, like they do in England. In the words of Joyce Watson, in a minute. So what we do need to do is have that local referendum to make sure that people can have their say, because it's only right that the public have got a say on these matters. I will take an intervention. I'm more kinder than other members in the chamber.
You and others have raised this issue of having a referendum if council tax increases over 5%. Now, whatever you think of council tax, at least that money is spent locally on essential services. Now, when the Conservatives raised and increased the VAT to 20%, when the Conservatives increased corporation tax from 19% to 25%, should there have been a referendum then?
Well, the thing is, you probably don't want a referendum on council tax, because the problem with socialism is they like to tell people how to spend their money. They don't like people having a say on how their money is spent. But we did have the same usual speeches in the chamber, didn't we? The same old 14-year lines. I say, if we'd have been in government a bit longer, you'd have had it striked off and had a 15, striked off, had 16. It's just the same old speech, isn't it, from Preda Owen Griffiths, Carolyn, Helydd, Joyce, because they all forget, don't they, why some of those really difficult decisions had to be made in 2010. And Helydd made quite an impassioned speech about the changes that have to be made in 2010. But I would like to remind Helydd, in 2010, when my party came into power, there was a little note left that said that the Labour Party had left no money left. They had bankrupted the country. And the job of a responsible government is to act properly when it's dealing with public money. And that's what what we did in office. I'll make a bit of progress, Helen, and I'll bring you back in. That's fine. Gareth Davis, I thought your speech was very, very passionate, talking about Denbighshire County Council and the performance and some of the things that are going on in your area, especially all the dog fouling in the streets. And I'm sure that's something that all of us see on a day-to-day basis when we're walking around. But it yet again shows, doesn't it, that this Labour government doesn't fund our local authorities properly. So that's why we see dog mess everywhere and the quality of our street scene going down. Carolyn Thomas, yes, the standard speech was out again, must have come from the Labour group office, about how a Welsh Government have done nothing wrong. They have been the shining lights for the past 26 years, haven't they? But 14 years of Westminster, horrible people. It's such a shame that actually you wouldn't criticise your own government in Westminster for actually the decisions they have made to make pensioners freeze this winter. I'll take an intervention, yes, that's fine.
In terms of the many times that you've mentioned the lines that have come from one side of this chamber, is there any comprehension that since 2010 the Welsh funding block grant has been at 2010 levels, and is there any surprise then that that has been handed down across Wales?
I'm not quite sure you understand economics either, because actually there was record levels of funding last year. And the reason I said decisions had to be made is because your party bankrupted the country. The funding formula was also raised in the debate, which is a very key matter, and it's something I think we all need to take extremely seriously, is the funding formula. The Minister said there is no political interference. Well, actually, the WLJ is politically led, the Welsh Government is politically led, so unfortunately, and it's led by Labour in both camps, so unfortunately it is political interference in the funding formula. But we do need the funding formula to be looked at, because rural authorities always get detrimented by it, and it's always Labour-led urban councils which seem to benefit. So we do need to see an independent review of the funding formula, and actually the political football of our funding formula taken away and reviewed independently. Just to pick up a few members, Janet Finn-Saunders. Thank you, Darren. Janet Finn-Saunders, yeah. Oh, I didn't realise I was over time. I was getting a bit carried away, Clywyd. There we are. There we are. I will conclude then that I would encourage everybody to support our motion today, because we're the only party on this side of the chamber that can fix our local government system. Labour have at a time, Plaid Cymru deal in fantasy, only us deal in the real world.